Old master had 70 slaves, mostly field hands. My mother was a field hand. One morning, word was brought to the quarter that we should go up to the great house. A number of strange white men rode up to the mansion. They were Negro traders. Men, women, and children all were crying, and confusion prevailed. Alarmed, I ran into the woods with a boy about my own age named Levi. "Lee," I said to him, "let's run away and not be sold like the rest," replied Lee. "Maybe they won't sell us. I'll go to Master William and ask him not to do it." "What will you get by going to Master William?" I asked him. "The best thing is to run away to the free states." "But," replied Levi, "we could not be safe this side of Canada. We should freeze to death before we got there." So ended our conversation. When night came, Levi wanted to go home and see if they had sold his mother. I didn't care about going back, as I had no mother to sell. My mother died when I was very young. As we turned our faces towards the quarter where we might at any moment be sold to replenish a failing purse, I felt myself to be what I really was, a poor, desolate slave boy. Levi was equally as sad. Said Levi, "Mother, were you sold?" "No, child, but a good many were sold." Slave sales of this type were just as solemn as a funeral. I must have been about 10, 11 years old then. One day, all hands were ordered to the fields to work, but I stayed behind, lurking about the house. Master Mac wanted to know why I did not go out. I answered that it was raining, that I was tired, and that I did not want to work. He then picked up an ox goad and said if I did not go to work, he would whip me. Then he struck at me, but I caught the stick, and we grappled and handled each other roughly for a time. When he called for assistance, he was badly hurt. I let go my hold, bade him goodbye, and ran for the woods. As I went by the field, I beckoned to my brother, who joined me at a rapid pace. We reached Baltimore on the following evening and then set out for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is where I had, for the first time, the great privilege of seeing William Lloyd Garrison, who came into the neighborhood accompanied by Frederick Douglass. They were having anti-slavery meetings. I shall never forget the impression that Garrison's glowing words made upon me. I listened with the intense satisfaction that only a refugee could feel when hearing well-chosen, strong speech, his hearty censure of the man-stealer. I knew every word he said was true. It was the whole truth, nothing kept back. I was now at the beginning of a new an important era of my life. While a slave, my scanty garments felt too tight for me. My very respiration seemed to be restrained by some supernatural power. But instead of the darkness of slavery, my eyes were almost blinded by the light of freedom. No, work was no trouble to me. When the work was done, the money was mine. I could go out on Saturdays and Sundays and home when I pleased without being whipped. But this was boyish fancy. After a few years of life in a free state, I found through bitter experience that to preserve my stolen liberty, I must pay unremittently and almost sleepless vigilance.
Appearing today, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, Scott Kirby, Cynthia "Cynt" Marshall, Rosario Dawson, and Eric Schmidt. Thank you to our Atlantic Festival underwriters on the founding level, Facebook. On the presenting level, Boston Consulting Group, EY, Genentech, Southern Company, Walton Family Foundation. On the supporting level, Allstate, U.S. Bank. On the contributing level, American Federation of Teachers, Barclays, the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, PayPal, Salesforce.org, and Truth Initiative. Here's Atlantic staff writer Katherine.
So, providing accurate, helpful health and safety guidelines to the public during a pandemic, one that is being caused by a new and very fast-changing virus, is not easy. I am joined today by the director of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, and we'll be talking about how the CDC makes its decisions about COVID-19 guidance and messaging. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's just dive right in. You have clearly inherited an incredibly difficult job at a very challenging point in our country's history. Tell me a little bit about what the toughest parts of the job have been so far and what has surprised you the most.
I once had a very wise mentor who said to me, if you're not a little bit afraid of your next job, then perhaps the job isn't big enough. And so I took that with me when I came here. I was a little bit afraid of this job, and certainly it has been a daunting task in the middle of a pandemic. It's been hard. I inherited an agency that is full of people who have been working tirelessly for the last 18 months to protect public health, that is all doing much of their work remotely. So getting to know the people who are doing that work has been hard, diving right in and recognizing so much of the future of the public and public health rides in the hands of this agency. And, I've taken on the task with that work in hand, and really feeling a great gift of inheriting incredible people who are working every day and night, literally, to make sure the public is safe.
Definitely. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your decision-making process, which has, by definition, had to be incredibly fast-paced and not always clear-cut in every single direction. You and your team have been repeatedly tasked with collecting and analyzing a very endless flow of data that's often imperfect and being collected in real time, and then making really high-stakes decisions for the public good. How are you balancing timeliness of these recommendations with sticking to scientific rigor? During a pandemic, what counts as enough to make a big sweeping recommendation, especially when data might conflict or when many of the experts are disagreeing with each other?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And one of the things that I think we've done just even since I've been here is to understand and try and anticipate what are the questions that people are going to be asking a month from now, 2 months from now, and what are the data that we're going to need to be collecting now in order to inform those decisions. Sometimes the data aren't as if we would want them, or they appear to us, they come to us and we say, oh no, is that really what's happening? And maybe I'll sort of take the description of what happened in July when we saw breakthrough infections from Barnstable County, Massachusetts, these breakthrough infections. So back in March, when we said vaccinated, or I should say in May, when we said vaccinated people could take off their masks, we had the Alpha variant, and we saw if you were a breakthrough infection with the Alpha variant, you actually couldn't transmit to other people. So fast forward in July, we had the Delta variant. We anticipated the vaccines would be working just as well. And in fact, they have been working well to prevent infection. But what we first saw in this Barnstable County outbreak was that the viral load was actually just as high in people who were breakthrough infections. We saw those data as the outbreak investigation was actively happening, literally. And we saw it on a weekend, and we said, wow, that would be different. And that would be policy changing if, in fact, this is what is happening. We didn't necessarily want to make those decisions on a single outbreak, so we reached out to our colleagues who were doing other outbreak investigations. One other county across the country was doing a similar investigation and actually found a similar thing. We reached out to international colleagues, and they were just starting to see data that showed something similar, all within a weekend. So we knew that we needed to move. We knew that we needed to change a policy because these were corroborated in several different places, literally in real time. And then we really knew that we needed to publish the data almost immediately so that people could see the data upon which we made those decisions. And that is some of the, speed that we've had to be able to review the data and to make new policy decisions.
Great. Yeah, and I think we are now in a somewhat similar situation with a little bit of messiness with the recent guidance on boosters. Given what has come out of the White House, FERB-PAC, the FDA, ACIP, and your own announcement that came out last Friday, I think some people are feeling a little bit confused, maybe even a sense of whiplash. I think very recently your own recommendation to greenlight high-risk workers for boosters was not what the ACIP advised you to do. Tell me a little bit about how much of that was based on what data was available at the time, also knowing that the public had been told to expect something very specific about who would be eligible and recommended for boosters. How did you balance those two things?
Right. So back in August, we have now set up a way to review our vaccine effectiveness data in real time, every 2 weeks or so from all of our cohorts. And that has really been helpful in informing where we need to go. In August, we started to see data that demonstrated some waning in infections. And so we knew we needed to plan, and we knew we needed to publicly plan because the data were going to be published. We've been talking to our international colleagues as well. And that's really where the planning phase had begun. We've been planning for the last month or so to make sure that when the data were available for boosters, that we would be ready to go. So fast forward, we had more data, this week, and the package went to the FDA. The Pfizer BioNTech package went to the FDA. Again, our booster announcement was for people who got Pfizer. And the scientific process worked. There's a vaccine advisory board to the FDA that met with scientific deliberation. The FDA authorized it. My vaccine advisory board, the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, met, and they gave me advice, and then I made some recommendations. And for the most part, there was a lot of consensus. So after listening to all of the science, I fully endorsed vaccine boosters for people greater than 65, for people who live in long-term care facilities, and for people who are at high risk of severe illness. So people with underlying medical conditions. And where there was a scientific close call, I listened to the science, and I ultimately ended up going with and fully in line with what the FDA advisory panel said, and what many in our CDC advisory panel said as well, which was to endorse boosters for people who are in high risk settings because of where they work or live. So these were our healthcare workers and our occupational, our grocery workers, our frontline workers.
Yeah, to clarify that point a little bit, the language in these recommendations was very specific. There are certain people who should get boosters, and that includes the over 65 crowd, older groups with comorbidities, and then there are people who may get boosters. What's the delineation between being recommended to get a booster and being allowed to? And, what's the qualitative difference here between that and just kind of greenlighting boosters for everyone?
It's really the strength of the scientific evidence. The strength of that evidence said we really should be recommending this. You absolutely should be recommending this. And for the people who we said may for, the people who live and work in high risk conditions, we're really, weigh your risks and benefits, understand what your own personal risk is, and make a decision based on that personal risk. Consult with your physician, consult with your pharmacist, consult with your public health officials, so that you can identify whether that you're in a place that a booster is right for you.
Yeah, I think a couple of follow-up questions to that. That there was a lot of data sort of breaking down vaccine effectiveness against the sort of different tiers of protection. We have more severe disease, hospitalization and death, all symptomatic disease, any infection whatsoever. And, it's been clear from the beginning that the public health priority is certainly to focus on the absolute worst outcomes, knowing that that is where vaccines are going to hold out the longest. What are you thinking at this point in terms of what boosters are going to do for the populations they've been greenlit for? Are you most worried about infections, some symptoms? Where can we actually see the biggest bang for our buck?
I think that this is exactly where the scientific deliberation was during all of these FDA and CDC vaccine advisory meetings. You know, our clinical trials were evaluating symptomatic disease. So it didn't create the bar of you have to prevent severe disease or hospitalization. You actually just had to prevent symptomatic disease. And so really the question was, do we have strength of evidence now for third shots that we should just be preventing symptomatic disease, or that we should really keep the bar and you have to prevent severe hospitalizations and deaths? And there's equipoise in that question. We don't, you know, some people feel strongly one way or another. What I will say is in our flu vaccination, we vaccinate people to prevent symptomatic disease. We have more experience with flu vaccines. We have longer horizons that we've been giving flu vaccines over years and years. But there are many people who very much believe, and I'm among them, that we should be preventing symptomatic disease because, in fact, there are long-term consequences, or because it keeps people out of the workplace, because even moderate disease can actually be pretty severe and debilitating. So there's a lot of equipoise in that question at this moment.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the example of the flu vaccine, which we know, you know, please correct me if I'm wrong, tops out with effectiveness around 60% most years. You know, it's a great vaccine. I got mine about a week and a half ago, and I'm very glad for it, but it is certainly not perfect. And it seems to be not as good as the COVID-19 vaccines we have. Why boost now if our vaccines seem to be holding up quite well against that, especially against very severe disease, hospitalization and death?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So I think some of the reasons that we need to be boosting now is because we are starting to see some people over the age of 65 in some cohorts, over the age of 75 in other cohorts, that are having waning associated with the vaccine, or perhaps associated with the Delta variant, and are landing in the hospital. And so that is the reason we feel like those especially vulnerable cohorts merit a boost at this moment. If we can prevent those hospitalizations, we've seen some deaths in people who are vaccinated. Generally, the mean age of those deaths is around 80. So we, you know, if we can give more protection to those people, there are many people who have believed that this was always going to be a 3-dose vaccine or a multi-dose vaccine. And really many vaccines that we have, you know, our hepatitis B vaccine is a prime and a boost at 6 months. So there are many vaccines that follow this schedule, but you're right. And I think one of the important places that you're right is, you know, flu vaccines in any given year are about 60% protective. We have wanted, yearned for a golden bullet COVID vaccine. And I think we have to manage our expectations of what a vaccine can do during pandemic times. And even though vaccinated, have to take the proper prevention measures.
Right. So, you know, my understanding is at this point, under your official recommendation, which you gave out on Friday, you are now included in a group that may get boosters based on individual benefit and risk. Are you planning to? And, you know, how would that situation have changed if you had stuck to the original recommendation from ACIP?
So am I planning on getting a booster? I am planning on getting a booster. I am not at high risk myself based on where I'm working right now. Much of the government is remote. So I am, you know, when I think about what my occupational risk is, if I were seeing patients still in the hospital, I would absolutely get a booster. And so I intend to. I want to make sure that people who are in higher risk categories than myself, I'm not crowding them out, but I intend to.
Got it. I think sort of following that logic, you know, you sort of gamed out for me, you know, your own risk benefit analysis just now. And this is what I think you and many others are asking people to do at this point. But I do want to point out here that a lot of the guidance so far has focused on very individualistic rhetoric, which is very tough for people to internalize at this point. You know, boosters protect you, masks protect you, your health is in your hands. You know, I think you've even said in the course of this conversation, people are being asked to weigh individual risks, individual benefits. How do we square that with a risk that is entirely communal, knowing that so much of the world remains entirely unvaccinated? Are we balancing the right metrics here, individual versus communal?
Yeah, I think that that's actually a really important concept. And many of our vaccine guidances have focused on the individual. Many of our, is from an individual standpoint, are your risks, are your benefits greater than your risks? And we get a lot of vaccines for that. But I do believe that we also have to take into account the societal benefits. So in addition to that healthcare worker not being sick in bed, perhaps getting long COVID or being out of work for 2 weeks. If that person's out of work for 2 weeks, that could be an ICU bed that can't be filled because they don't have workforce. And so I think that there are real, tangible societal benefits from so many people being out of work. I say that also for teachers. There are school systems that are having to close schools because their teachers are out sick. If we can prevent those from happening, not only do you prevent individual illness for that teacher themselves, but also, can potentially keep a school or a classroom open.
Do you think the boosters are going to have a substantial impact on transmission?
I have frequently said we are not going to boost our way out of this pandemic. We need to get unvaccinated people vaccinated. We have, to this day, in hospitals, even with waning, even with Delta, the people are you're tenfold more likely to be hospitalized if you are unvaccinated, and 11-fold more likely to die if you're unvaccinated. And so really, yes, we need to optimize the protection for people who are vaccinated already, but we really need to, in addition, spend time, energy to get the unvaccinated vaccinated. And I mean that here in the United States, and I mean that around the world.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I do wonder what the past couple weeks, really past couple months of conversations over boosters, which are explicitly shots for people who've already gotten some vaccines, what message does that send to the unvaccinated? There's a lot to be confused about for, I think, everyone. Seeing top health experts disagreeing immensely over recommendations. What effect does that have on public trust, especially when we're still trying to get first doses to people who have not gotten any?
Yeah, I think right now, the people who remain unvaccinated, we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to get into the communities. We have to understand what it is. This is not, the unvaccinated population is not uniform. There are people who have been waiting for more data. So let us present the data that we have. We have over nearly 6 billion people in the world vaccinated at this point. We have over 180 million people vaccinated here in this country. We have extraordinary experience with this vaccine now. So let's present the safety data. What are the questions of people who are unvaccinated? What is it that they are worried about? And right now we have to do that from trusted messengers. We have to inform people and give them the information that they need. We have to meet people where they are. This is not about blame and shame. This is about help me understand what has made you reluctant, you personally reluctant, and let's get to a place where you feel less reluctant. And even if that conversation doesn't result in your rolling up your sleeves today, it may be one step closer to your rolling up your sleeve tomorrow. And that's hard work.
Definitely. So to follow up on that, another question about meeting people where they are. I think in recent days, especially, we've heard a lot of complaints and confusion from people who got the Moderna or J&J vaccines, including many in older and high-risk groups who have now, gotten on good word from federal officials that they are in high-risk groups and maybe in need of boosters, but they have no path to get them. To my knowledge, even J&J recipients who are moderately to severely immunocompromised haven't been greenlit for boosters. You talked earlier about making decisions based on limited data, which sometimes has to be done. Why aren't we making faster moves on this front, knowing that sometimes it's better to advise in advance of all of the data?
So that's a great question. First, the severely immunocompromised, we created a pathway for that several weeks ago. So those people, people like bone marrow transplant patients, cancer patients, organ recipients, all of those people now do have a pathway to be boosted. But your point is well taken. And what I want to say is, this is a walk, don't run situation to go get your boost. The vaccine effectiveness is still working really quite well. And we are now doing the scientific diligence to make sure that we can review the data so that we can bring it to you before we get into trouble, but really after due process. That is happening in real time. Moderna is coming, J&J is coming. It will come to the FDA and they will treat it with urgency, and then it'll come to the CDC. We will treat it with urgency. And that will come in the next couple of weeks. So, what I want to reiterate is we want to do the scientific due diligence, because if we rush it, it looks like we haven't done that scientific due diligence. And we're doing it to get ahead of the virus. And that is exactly what we're doing. We have not forgotten about J&J and Moderna. We will be with you.
Great. And final question here. Hopefully we can end on a positive note, but I want to ask what you are optimistic about. We have a lot of big moves on the horizon, hopefully an EUA for kids under 12, the rollout of mandates that might get more unvaccinated people vaccinated. What are you hopeful for, and what does this spell for the coming winter?
Certainly, this virus has been humbling. So I want to remember all of those twists and turns that I have had over the last literally 18 months and said, well, I think, this may be a really bright step out of it. I do think that we have some really bright steps. I can see a future where we have the majority of the public vaccinated. We're working to vaccinate other people around the world, that we are optimizing boosters optimizing vaccine effectiveness with boosters here in the United States, where children are starting to get vaccinated and feeling really comfortable being back at school. I absolutely can see those times. And what really gives me hope, and there's been so many challenges with this and so much dissension around it. But the things that I find beautiful are where people have really come together in the spirit of helping one another. And those stories are fewer and far between, because I just don't think they make the news as often. But having worked on the front lines for a year before coming to CDC, and now working squarely in public health, and seeing so many ways that the communities are coming together to help one another, I think is truly inspiring.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Here's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. And I'm joined by Scott Kirby, the CEO of United Airlines. We were going to be together, if I'm not mistaken, but you had an airline delay.
I had a pre-pandemic issue with a flight on another airline.
Yeah. I'm sure it was another airline. I'm sure it was.
It was another airline.
Well, I mean, it's lucky for your airline that it wasn't your airline, I suppose.
Yes, it is.
Have you ever actually?
Lucky for me, that'd have been a harder conversation.
Have you ever actually been delayed or grounded by your own airline? You're trying to move.
Oh, yeah. It happens to me just like it happens to everyone.
I just have this picture of you.
It's maybe a little less unusual, but it does happen to me as well.
Yeah, it must be sweaty moments in different airports. Well, listen, thank you. Thanks for doing this. Anyway, we're using the miracle of technology to come together at the last minute. Let's talk about. We'll get to the pandemic in a second, but I just want to talk about something that was just recently in the news the last couple of days. Your airline was fined $1.9 million for the sin of leaving passengers on planes for too long. Could you talk about that? And I think some of these date back possibly to 2015. I'm just curious to know your feelings about the punishment and the crime.
Well, look, you're right. This mostly dates back to 2015, and some incidents that have happened in between those. We do everything we can to avoid those incidents. Those are some of the worst incidents, is when a customer on an airplane a long time. Pretty much universally, what you find in those instances is that something happens on an airfield where the weather has closed the airport and planes are just stuck in the conga line. And even if you try to get out, if you start trying earlier to get back to the terminal, you frequently can't get back to the terminal because the line ahead of you. And so this doesn't happen very often. If you followed the industry, you could remember in the past some airlines had some really high-profile issues with 7-8 hours. The new DOT rules have effectively eliminated those, but it still can be challenging at all airlines when an airport closes in particular. But the good news is these mostly go back a long time. What we do now is more proactively, look out and say, it looks like this airport might be closed, so we're just going to, wind up proactively canceling flights instead of taking the risk of getting them out stuck on the airfield.
Right. I want to come back to issues of customer service because I know you've been thinking about this a lot. But let's go to talk about the pandemic. You've been a leader on certain pandemic-related policies. My question for you is: would it be a lot easier for you and the other airline chiefs if the government would simply say no vaccine, no passage through a TSA checkpoint? Would that just make it a lot easier?
I mean, I think that what the government has said, which is that the most efficient way to get the country vaccinated is an employer mandate, is really the right way to do it. Instead of creating a hassle for you every time you go to fly, every time you get on a subway, every time you get on a train to prove it, if we get an effective employer mandate, that is going to cover enough of the country that we'll have essentially everyone vaccinated. We'll certainly be to a herd immunity level at that point. So I think that's the more efficient way to do this. That's what the administration has said, and I support that. We've been aggressive at United, more so than almost any company out there, at our employer mandate, and so we are requiring it for employees. In fact, as of today, we're at 98.5% of our employees vaccinated, and today's the last day for them to upload. So hopefully that number is going to climb north of 99% by the time we get to midnight.
I want to come back to that, but let me just push back on something that you said earlier. Yeah. I'm just trying to picture myself as an employee of United who works in the air. I think I'd rather hear the CEO say, you know what, I don't think anybody should get on the plane without a vaccine. I mean, as you well know, it's hard enough to work in the air right now because of another issue we'll talk about, passenger behavior. Yeah. So why? I mean, why won't you simply say it would be great if no vaccine, no fly list? I don't understand. Yeah. It would certainly it would give more protection to your employees, I think.
Yeah. So first, what I'd say is when you're in the air in particular, that is literally the safest place you can be if you're going to be indoors with other people. The study that we worked on with the Department of Defense found that essentially being right next to somebody on an airplane, because of the airflow, because the air is refiltered through HEPA grade minutes, is the equivalent of being 15 feet away from someone in a building. So it's amazing how safe you are on board airplanes. And for me, this pandemic, this requirement was really about, I've written a letter to every employee, to the family of every employee who has passed away from COVID. I wrote 2 this weekend to for unvaccinated employees to their families. And the moment that I made the decision was I got another email from another unvaccinated employee, and my real goal was to protect all of our employees, and that felt like my highest obligation. And Dr. Walensky was just on, and the reality is, once you've been vaccinated, even if you're exposed, the chances that you're going to get a severe illness, hospitalization, or die are really low. And I viewed my highest obligation as to protecting all of those employees, because that's where I can do something about. Right. As to the broader public, we certainly are prepared, and we've been preparing for over a year to support a vaccine requirement if the government decides to implement it. But the CDC, who was just on, they've got more data, more scientists, more medical professionals to make that decision for the country at large or for travel at large. And we're certainly prepared to support them, but I think we should probably follow their lead on that particular issue.
Can you talk a little bit about managing employees who didn't want to get vaccinated? Are you surprised at the very high number of people who have actually chosen at the end of the day to get the vaccine? Or are you just attributing that to human nature? They want to save their jobs.
I'm less surprised than most people are that we're already at 98.5% and likely to go north of 99% by the time it's done. a lot of this was, it's some of it, many of the employees I've talked to, it wasn't so much that they were opposed to the vaccine. It's just not their highest priority. Well, many of us, have had COVID as the central issue in our lives for the last year and a half. That's not true of everyone. And so a lot of people, have actually said to me, like, I always intended to get the vaccine, but, I just had other stuff to do and didn't do it. And now they have. So I've been pleasantly surprised at the reaction from employees, also the cultural change. I have had more employees as I walk through airports tell me how proud they are of United Airlines, I think, than everything in the rest of my career combined over this issue. So those that are thinking about doing it, I don't think you realize people don't realize how much of a majority of people are out there that really want us to do the right thing, that want us to stand for something. And this has been one of those examples where our employees, by and large, are really supportive of what we've done, doing it together as a team, lots of people talking to each other. And because we were so public with this, it's caused the conversations to happen in break rooms and, weekend events where employees might be together with each other. And they've sort of all pushed each other together to get here. And I think that's why, we're going to get to north of 99% by the time this is all said and done.
All right. Talk about another possible drag on employee morale, the issue of behavior in the air, and what you've specifically done for it. So two-part question. One is, how serious is this as a problem? I mean, we see YouTube clips and, we see on social media these things. How common is it on your airline in particular? And do you think it's a solvable problem?
So I'll start with the second one. I think it is a largely solvable problem, which gets to the first part of the question, which is this really, there haven't been any of these high-profile incidents on United. We don't have zero incidents, but it's no different than it was in the pre-pandemic era when our rate is no different than it was before. And that's a testament to our flight attendants, their professionalism, and how we've managed this. We were the first airline to require masks on board airplanes. And we knew at the time, that was controversial at the time, we knew at the time that it was going to create the potential for conflict or for temperatures to rise in the sky. And we never want that to happen. That's the worst place to have conflict or escalating temperatures. And because of that, we created a process. We told our flight attendants, you're not supposed to be the police in the sky. Your job is to tell them, politely, nicely, de-escalate if you can. But if they won't put the mask on, our flight attendants all of our airplanes have these cards on them. They simply give the customer a card that says, if you don't put the mask on, you're going to be banned from flying United for the duration of the crisis. And then it's over. We don't fight.
And that actually gets everybody to go, oh, I see.
It doesn't get everybody to. We've had to ban 700 customers. But it largely works. It gives the flight attendants the tools to de-escalate and deal with it. And because of that, we haven't really, and we worked with the union on it at the very beginning. So we worked together with our unions. Instead of just putting the flight attendants at the tip of the spear, we worked together with them. And they've been an amazing group of professionals. And so while we haven't had zero incidents, we've had far fewer, in fact, our mask incidents are down over 50% since the start of the year. Our team has done a really, really good job. And so, it is a little different on United than I think, at least what I read in the press about other airlines.
What do you think is causing these problems to a greater degree at other airlines?
Well, one, if you put the flight attendants out, without any tools or training, and they're left on their own, some of them think it's, my job to make sure this person, gets the mask on right this second, or we're going to have to divert the airplane, and they just don't have the guidelines or the guidance. And in a world where, you've had situations where, there's been crew shortages and other things, when the temperature, is going up, if people have been delayed, for multiple hours or missed days, when you start to increase the tension in the system, it makes it more likely that in any scenario that something can happen. But mostly I think it's about really working with the flight attendants, giving them the tools, the training, the help to de-escalate situation. And look, I'm not at the other airlines, so it's hard to know for sure what's happened there. But those tools have worked pretty effectively at United Airlines at least.
Who has the hardest job in an airline? Is it the flight attendant?
I like to tell our flight attendants, the flight attendants are the face of United Airlines, but our gate agents are the heart of United Airlines. And I think they actually have the hardest job because every time something goes wrong, something went wrong on my flight today, And they're the tip of the spear where all the customers are there. They're already through security. They've already had to, go through all the tension of getting to that point. And now something has gone wrong. And 99% of the time, the gate agent doesn't have the answer. They don't know, what's happening with maintenance or with the weather, but people expect them to know. And they're the ones that have to be the heart of an airline to me. And they're the ones that almost always, if something goes wrong, they are facing it, I think, more than anyone.
Yeah, very few people go up to gate agents and say, "Great boarding process, thank you." Yeah. No, that is true. This takes me to a serious and very large question about customer service, and I don't know if this counts as a conflict of interest or not. I will stipulate that United is my default airline.
Thank you.
I'm so in deep in miles that
you deserve the best.
I don't deserve the best, but I just don't want to. I just want to get from point A to point B on time, right? But no, the question is a serious one. It seems, and this is not a comment just on United Airlines, it's a comment on all the big American airlines, including the one that so horribly treated you today.
They were fired.
Yeah, I know. The question is, I can't think of another industry, a consumer-facing industry in America, that people have a more ambivalent relationship with. Especially you think about before the pandemic, change fees and delays and overcrowding, and you're being stuffed into this thin metal tube. The seats are back to back. There are so many points of potential friction between your company and your consumer, and really, I can't think of another business in which, look, some of it is obviously weather-related. You can't control for everything, but talk specifically about that. I think you have talked pretty bluntly about the failings of the mass industry in America to take care of consumers. Yeah.
Look, this is the biggest thing we're trying to change at United Airlines is a focus on the customer and doing the right thing for the customer. And there's a whole bunch that we're doing. So, we ordered 500 new airplanes. More importantly, on those 500 airplanes, we're going to invest in seatback entertainment in every seat, high-speed Wi-Fi that actually works, power ports in every seat, large enough overhead bins that every single customer can put their bag on the airplane. We're doing all kinds of stuff. Before long, you're going to be able to pre-order meals from multiple selections and all kinds of hard product things that we're doing. But the most important thing is the service culture and how we treat customers and how we interact with them. And airlines, including United, have historically had a very rules-based culture where it is black and white, and you wind up in those instances with black and white answers that feel wrong to the customer, and you wind up defending the indefensible on policy. So trying to change that customer service culture is the biggest thing we're doing. Part of that, by the way, is eliminating some of those odious rules that get in the way of customer service. So you mentioned change fees. I've hated change fees for my entire airline career. And so during the pandemic, United Airlines became the first, large network airline in the United States to permanently eliminate change fees. We've got this program called Connection Saver, where we can hold airplanes for as much as 10 minutes to wait for connecting customers. And that is important for all those customers. They care about change fees. They care about their connections. But it's also important for that gate agent who I talked about before. If you spent your career as a gate agent and you've had a management team telling you have to slam the door in a customer's face, and that customer comes running up out of breath to the gate, and they say, "Look, the airplane is still there. I see it. Just open the door and let me on. This is the last flight of the day. I'm going to, for whatever important reason." And you're forced to tell them no. And then your management team comes in and says, "We want you to do the right thing for the customer." You think they're full of it because they have been. We can't have policies that get in the way. And so at United, we're changing those. We're trying to encourage our people to do the right thing for the customer. We've had record increases in our net promoter scores, like to a scale that we never even thought was possible. Even in the last month, where we've had at Newark, one of our big airports, one of the two parallel runways has been out of service. And anytime there's weather, that creates all kinds of issues. That team in Newark, with that obstacle, has had their net promoter scores still going up. It's changing the culture to give our employees the confidence that they can do the right thing for customers. That's really going to make the difference.
Could you spend 1 minute talking about it's sounds like inside baseball, but my understanding is that it's extraordinarily important in changing a corrosive culture inside an airline. This issue of delay codes. Explain what they are in 30 seconds, and then tell me why you hate them. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always hated it. The delay code is every time a flight, this is true at all airlines everywhere in the world that I know of, and it has been for my entire career. Every time a flight is delayed, even by 1 minute, someone gets blamed. Was it the pilot's fault? Was it the flight attendant's fault? Was it the gate agent's fault? Was it the baggage handlers, maintenance? Whatever the issue, someone gets blamed. And because of that, it creates a corrosive, toxic culture where people are, instead of doing the right thing as a team together for the customer, they're put in a position where they're forced to fight with each other because they're worried about the consequences if they have too many delays that are pinned on them. And so, and that's always been done because it's important data to be able to figure out how to make things run better operationally. What we've done is our digital team has gotten enough data that we can get all the data we need about what's happening at the larger airline without needing to put employees in a position of on each individual flight saying who's at fault. So we can track the things we need to fix, but we can let them be a team to take care of the customers and do the right thing for the customers. It's another one of those things that is culturally transformational to get them focused on the customer instead of all the other stuff that they don't need to be focused on.
Right. It's interesting because the customer does not understand that the airport is actually populated by warring factions or has been populated by warring factions.
And they may not be warring factions, but they're nervous of if this flight is delayed. That's why a gate gets slammed in someone's face because a gate agent will look at it reasonably and say, if I don't do this and something else happens, it could get pinned on me. Yeah. And it's the wrong thing to be measuring when what we care about is doing the right thing for customers.
There's so much to talk about, and obviously we hope to have you back next year to talk about your green policies and all the rest. There's one question that I do want to end on because I think it's probably an enormous challenge to anyone who runs a global airline. There was a profoundly important incident that occurred late spring in which the president of Belarus forced a Ryanair flight out of the sky because there was a Belarusian dissident on the plane. Ryanair, they sent the Air Force. You have to land. It's a civilian jetliner. My question is, A, is that your worst nightmare? And B, do you have contingencies? I mean, you fly to a lot of controversial places. They're not necessarily all democracies. You're flying over many different kinds of countries. How do you actually, I think that we entered a new universe when that happened.
Yeah, that was disturbing. I don't know if it's my worst nightmare, but
well, obviously there are millions of nightmares that an airline chief can have.
Well, but when I talk about to our board or others, when someone asks me about risk, geopolitical risk is always high on the list. Whether it's something like that, or all the places, as you say, that we either fly to or fly over around the world. We're fortunate to have a great team that stays in touch, a security team around the world. We have great work with the U.S. government, given we fly to almost 100 different countries around the world, and we overfly even more than that as we're going around the globe. The U.S. government, in partnership with allies around the world, gives us very good security information, briefings. So you can't ever say that something like that won't happen, but we tend to have pretty good information ahead of time. And when the world is heating up in a particular region, sometimes we'll stop flying. There have been several times, for example, that we've had to stop flying to India because of some of the countries that we fly over to get to India. And we pause that and we let those customers, we fly them to Frankfurt and they connect on our partner Lufthansa, who can fly, it's close enough they can fly around some of those places. So we do have a lot of those types of situations where we're making adjustments on the fly to our operation, particularly at United, because we're such a large global carrier.
And this is just one quick follow-up. This is a linked question, as you'll see. How dependent is the success of your airline on maintaining good relations with the Chinese government?
Well, we're the largest airline to China. All of Asia is about 11% of our revenues in the pre-pandemic era. China is by far the largest portion of that. I think, anyone in business would probably tell you something that is the same, which is we need to be able to find a way to coexist successfully and work together with China. acknowledging that our systems are different. We're not going to have the Chinese system. The Chinese are not going to have our system of government and rules. But finding places, finding the common ground where we can work together is important to all of us. Our economies are so interlinked. It's not, just United Airlines flying passengers there from our perspective. Our economies are so interlinked in ways that most people don't even realize or take for granted, that we need to, each of us, work together. And it is in each of our best interests to find the common ground, accept that it won't all be common, but to find the common ground where we can.
Scott Kirby, thank you. Good luck getting to your next destination. You should try calling that 1-800 number for 1K customers. It's pretty good. You might have some success there. And we'll see you soon.
I look forward to seeing you in person next year.
All right, we'll see you soon. Thank you very much for doing this. Thank you.
For a session produced by our underwriter Genentech, please welcome Nicole Richie, Global Head of Health Equity and Population Science, and Quita Beeler Highsmith, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer.
Hi, and welcome. I'm Nicole Richie, the Global Head of Health Equity and Population Science at Genentech. I'm so pleased to join you today alongside one of my favorite people, our phenomenal Chief Diversity Officer, Quita Highsmith, to talk about the urgent need for interventions to tackle health inequities. And Quita, I know you're as excited as I am to be here today, because certainly this is a topic we are both deeply committed to. And it's really, in fact, why we ended up working so closely together.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. And I'm excited to share with the audience the work that we've done, especially the two of us, since founding Genentech's Advancing Inclusive Research, to bring historically underrepresented people into our clinical research programs back when we met in 2017. And as you know, Nicole, it is right now, it is an urgent issue for us to really think about how do we address marginalized communities that are continue to be hit hardest by the ongoing pandemic.
Absolutely. And of course, inequities in our health system have long existed in this country, and predating COVID, but the pandemic has really magnified the situation and brought greater attention to this important issue of health inequities. So last year, Genentech undertook the efforts to do a health equity study and found nothing short of a crisis of trust in our healthcare system. And Quita, this year, we have another round of data.
Yes, and I was excited that we did that first study last year, and now we're taking a second look to probe deeper this year to understand the patient's experiences, especially those of the medically disenfranchised. Last year, we looked at 2,200 patients, 1,000 in the general population, and then 300 each of Black, Latinx, LGBTQ plus and low socioeconomic status, meaning they make less than $35,000 a year and reported having trouble accessing healthcare. We looked at a similar population, but this year we added healthcare providers. More than 400 healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and physicians' assistants were surveyed. And that's particularly important because providers represent the face of the healthcare system to patients, and they have a tremendous opportunity to help drive change. So what did we find? That both patients and medical professionals overwhelmingly agree that healthcare inequities have actually gotten worse over the course of the pandemic. And roughly half of the medically disenfranchised patients say their feelings about the system have actually deteriorated. And more than half of them continue to feel that the healthcare system is rigged against them. And what did health providers think? Many agree that the system needs reform. Only 50% believe that it acts in the best interest of society. And nearly 9 out of 10 are seeing their own patients stopping care. Nicole, what do you think about the trust?
Yeah, absolutely. We heard loud and clear from patients as well that being taken seriously and feeling understood by their doctor is key and fundamental to building trust in the system overall. And unfortunately, while the vast majority of providers do feel that they're being sensitive to the needs of patients, Unfortunately, more than half of medically disenfranchised patients do not feel understood. In addition to this, and what's making it much worse, is actually the problem of misinformation. Actually, 82% of healthcare providers say that misinformation is a serious threat to the system, and they overwhelmingly agree that it's an even greater threat to disenfranchised patients. Quita, what do you take away from these data?
That healthcare professionals are uniquely positioned to help build trust. I mean, you're seeing someone at their most vulnerable stage, and that presents a real opportunity to advance the conversation. But we certainly can't put the weight of the entire healthcare system and its challenges on the back of healthcare professionals, especially after the last 18 months. But what we can do is tackle both the root cause of inequity and equip providers with the tools and resources that they need to be part of the solution.
Yep. I fully agree. And of course, in addition, it's certainly not something that patients can bear the burden for, and nor should they be expected to address for themselves. I think that we found by listening deeply to the voices of marginalized patients and their providers, we're in a much better position to understand how we can actually intervene and create solutions. To me, that really points to the need for a community-led grassroots effort. And while we know there's no silver bullet, we know when we engage directly with the people who are living these experiences, we can start to make tangible progress and start to dismantle the barriers of this unequal and unjust system. And Quita, I know you agree with me that the time to do this is now.
Absolutely, right now. Bold action is required because things are not improving. And what's more, we're not talking about a minority of patients here. So let's get real. We're quickly moving towards the United States becoming a majority minority population. The Census Bureau estimates that already the majority of the nation's children are people of color. We urgently need to make sure that medically disenfranchised patients feel valued, feel respected, feel understood when they are seeking care. And I like to say real change starts at home. So what are we doing, Nicole, at Genentech?
Absolutely. Our work at Genentech is really to make medicines for people who are facing serious diseases. And in order to do this, we have to conduct clinical research to understand how our medicines work in patients. But to do this properly, we really have to include more representative patient populations in our research. And we're working to do this, focus most on the disease areas that have the greatest disproportionality in patients and people of color. We're also leveraging our real-world data sources to really understand the drivers of disparities. And finally, we've launched the Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance, the first of its kind, where we're partnering with highly experienced and trusted cancer centers located in areas with higher Black and Hispanic Latinx patient populations. Beyond our own walls, we're also working with legislators on efforts to remove barriers to clinical trial participation. And we're committed to this work in health equity through our philanthropic giving. And last year we gave $16 million in grants to focus on community-based organizations and efforts to advance health equity.
Thanks, Nicole. You know, the number one thing that we need to do is stop tiptoeing around the issue of race and health inequity. And this work has to be in the community, for the community, by the community. We've got to build coalitions and partnerships, and it can start small. What I call the 3 Bs, the bishop, the barbershop, and the beauty salon, because oftentimes that's where some of our communities are getting information. But each and every one of us can be a change maker. And I will leave you with a quote from anthropologist Margaret Mead that has stuck with me. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play here. And at Genentech, we're committed to this work. And many of the groups that are part of the Atlantic Festival this week are, and so much great work is happening. So our call to action for all of those engaged in this session is to get involved in any way you can. And for more information on our work, we invite you to visit gene.com.
Here's the co-anchor of the Today Show and Today with Hoda and Jenna, Hoda Kotb.
As we all know, the NBA has been dominated by men for as long as any of us can remember, behind the scenes as well, until there was a great year. It was 2018, and that was when the first Black female CEO was named to the Dallas Mavericks. It is my honor, my privilege to sit with Cynthia Marshall. I call her Cynt, and so does everybody else who knows her and loves her. Hi, Cynt, how are you?
I am doing great, Hoda. How are you doing?
You're just a bright light. I cannot contain myself with the excitement I have for sitting with you in this moment. And I'm looking at where you are, and for anyone who knows where you are, we want to begin with where you started, because everyone would want to know, how does this journey happen? Your journey was totally unique to you. So I picture you as a young girl, a little girl, just kind of dreaming about what she wanted to be. So when you were picture yourself as like a young girl, and close your eyes, and what did you verbalize? What did you think you could become?
Hoda, I wanted to be a math teacher. I love numbers, and I would just sit in the corner with my math books. I always tell people my mom put 2 books in my hand at an early age, a math book in one hand and the Bible in the other, so to make sure I behave. And I wanted to be a math teacher. And so just worked really hard, just idolized my 9th grade math teacher, had some wonderful educators wrap their arms around me. I mean, you know my story. So growing up poor, a lot of violence, domestic violence, all of that. But I just had these wonderful people in my life, including my mom. And so I wanted to be a math teacher and was on my way to be a math teacher until I got to college and took one business administration class that changed everything.
And the world changed. I am so interested in this, but I do think so many of us are shaped by our childhood when we're real little. And I just wanted you to also close your eyes and just describe for me your childhood bedroom. What did it look like?
Okay, my childhood looked like my parents leaving. I'll keep my eyes. You can tell me when I can open my eyes again.
You open them up.
My parents leaving Birmingham, Alabama on a train when I was 3 months old. So you know the civil rights history. So you know the 16th Street Baptist Church that was bombed and 4 girls lost their lives. Actually, September 15th, 1963. So we just had the anniversary. That was actually my mother's church. And so she left that church 3 years prior to that when I was a baby, because they didn't want their kids growing up in the Jim Crow segregated South. So we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in a public housing project. And I saw some of everything, experienced domestic violence, actually saw my father shoot a man in the head when I was 11 years old. And it was in defense of me because someone came to our house to wreak havoc on our family, and my father responded in self-defense. But I actually saw that. And fortunately, I had some wonderful people wrap their arms around us. I had a police officer take me to school every day, because when we were all sequestered in the house, I cried, Hoda, because I wanted to go to school. Because school was a place for me where I could just find refuge, feel safe. It was a place where I excelled. And so my mother, God bless her, figured out a way for me to get to school. And so a police officer, a uniformed police officer, took me to school when I was in the 7th grade after this incident occurred. So he'd either take me in his police car or he'd ride the bus with me in his uniform. So like when I got this job and I had detail and all that, I told them I'm used to it. I had Secret Service when I was 11 years old because these people just wrapped their arms around me. And then 4 years later, my parents divorced. It was an ugly, violent divorce. I ended up getting my nose broken that summer. We had to flee our house for safety purposes. But my mother's prayer, Hoda, was that, and I could just close my eyes and see it. My mother's prayer was that we would make it back home before school started. There were still 3 of us at home. I was going to be a junior in high school, head cheerleader. And that was her prayer, because education was everything. I mean, that was always the theme running through our family. And so we made it back home. And I went back to school as a junior.
Well, it sounds like, first of all, your mom sounds incredible. I mean, what a force. She was going to will it, that you were going to be a successful child. Did you have any support? I know your parents' divorce was violent, and you said terrible. You mentioned your nose was broken. Did your dad believe that you could be somebody?
No. He actually told me and my youngest sister at some point we would be hookers on the street without him. And that's just in a fit of rage when the divorce occurred and all that. And so, but my mom was telling us just the opposite, that we could do anything we wanted to do. So I actually told my sister, who was all upset about what my dad said, I said, it's not true. I said, we're going to be some first in this family to graduate from a big college. And we're going to help mom get out of these projects. Well, she didn't need any help. My mother is the hardest working woman on the planet. I said, and then I'm going to be the president of something one day and make my money on Wall Street. So we got this. And I probably didn't say we got this at that time, but pretty much that's what I was saying. And
now, I mean, to me, it's like, here's the thing. You had one cheerleader in your life, your mom, and I'm sure it took a village. And then you had the forces of your dad. And I know you said in a fit of rage, but to even hear your father say, you know, you're going to end up as a hooker on the street. Like, I cannot imagine how damaging that must have felt. Yet somehow I look at you and all I see is optimism. All I see is hopefulness. Did you have that growing up through all of that? And where on earth did that come from?
Yes, I had it. And I think I got it from my mom. And that's why it's so important that, you know, people have caring adults in their life. I got it from my high school teachers. 3 teachers and a principal embraced me when they saw that, you know, broken nose, and they didn't judge us. They didn't judge us by our zip code. They knew my mom had a desire for her kids to go to college, and it's the community. I mean, it really is that village that wrapped around my mom and her circumstances and people at church. And so I was always optimistic. I was always taught to dream, focus, pray, and act. I mean, that's just the 4 words.
Dream, focus, pray, and act.
Pray and act. So have big, big dreams no matter what. Just be positive, have big dreams, never let dreams go. I'm 61 years old, I still have big dreams. Focus, so handle your business. So when I got to college, I put my boyfriend on hold for the entire 4 years. I was focused.
Wait, what'd you tell him? You wait, I got work to do?
Yeah, because he called me my first week in college and he said, oh, surprise, I've transferred schools, because he was 3 hours away from me in Fresno, California. He said, I've transferred schools so I can be close to you. I'm right across the bridge at San Francisco State University. And I said, hold up, boyfriend. I got a surprise for you. I will call you when I graduate. This was my first week in college. I stepped on Berkeley's campus. Everything was big. I knew it was time for me to be big. I knew a lot of people had invested in getting me to that point. I didn't have, and here's what I told him, Hoda. I said, I don't have time for some smooth talking cutie who wants to play when I need to study. I got to handle my business. And so I told him I would call him when I graduated. And so I think I saw him once after that. He'd go and see my mom and tell my mom he was going to marry me and all that. But I didn't see him. And so I called him the day I graduated.
No, you did not. And what did you say? I'm ready. Hello?
Yeah, I said, hey, I just graduated and I'm going to start work for the phone company. I got this great job and my mom's having a party at 6 o'clock. She's still in the projects, but she's getting out and I need you to be there at 6 o'clock. And he said, who is this? I said, don't act like you don't know who I am. Come on, the party's at 6. And he said, well, I'm engaged. So he actually was engaged. And I said, okay, that is the wrong answer. I told you I was going to call you the day I graduated. I just graduated at 2 o'clock. It is 3 o'clock, like 1 hour, dude. Be at the party. And so I don't know what happened. The rest is history. He showed up.
Okay.
And I've been married 38 years.
How long have you been married?
38 years.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, you are anyone who has that. Look, most people have confidence in their school, but not with boys. Some people have confidence with boys and not in school. You seem to have confidence in all of the lanes. Am I right?
Yes, I had that confidence shattered though, a couple of years into my marriage. So kind of the first time where things just didn't work out when I started having miscarriages and all that. But up until that point, yes, I was pretty confident. I did what I said I was going to do. I called him. So he needed to get to the party.
Well, you know what? I get why he got in line, and he was a smart man to do that. Life is so complicated, and it comes with so many different lanes and avenues. And one of them is the work lane, and you had that. You had this great job at AT&T. One of them is the love lane. You happen to have reconnected with the man who was the love of your life, who was smooth talking, and then became the real deal. And then, most women are interested in a family, and that was one of your dreams too. And yet you and your husband tried and tried and tried. And then came Carolyn.
Yep, Special K. Carolyn with the K. My mom's name is Carolyn, so we named hers Carolyn with the K.
Yes. And what happened?
I had 4 second trimester miscarriages, and so painful every time, almost died a few times. And my husband wanted to give up because, you know, one time a doctor said, do you want us to try to save the baby or her? And he just said he just never wanted to be in that position again. And so he wanted to give up, and I said, no, we have to try one more time. And we did, and I made it past 16 and a half weeks, so I got to 20 and a half weeks. And then we just got a big surprise because we didn't know there was anything in the middle. We thought either I'd have another miscarriage or I'd have a full-term pregnancy. And so I went into preterm labor and had Special K, 1 pound, 2 ounces. The doctor said she'd live for 2 days, and she was just defying the odds. She lived for 6 months, had 5 different surgeries, and was just fighting every step of the way. And we just kept saying, as long as she fought, we would fight. And if she stopped fighting, we would know that we had to let her go, and the Lord had another plan for our family. And we fought, and we fought, and we fought, and they still do a surgery at Children's Hospital Oakland, and they dedicated to Special K because I actually found the little cure for her condition in reading an article, but it was about 2 months too late to intervene and do the surgery. They did the surgery anyway, gave her 2 extra months. And so at her funeral, her doctor, Thomas Schusterbrock in Berkeley, he basically did a eulogy, and he said, Carolyn Marshall was here to teach us that we're not God. And she was here to teach us, she was here for a reason, to teach us to have faith. And so he went through this whole thing. And so I always say my baby was here for a reason. She was here for a reason. But the Lord did have another plan for our life. And I find it was the first time in my life that I just felt like, okay, I'm not in control, which I've never been in control. But, you know, I get that false sense of being in control.
We all think we are. All the while, you know, you're making your way at AT&T and you're working your way up. Now, sometimes when you go to work at a job, they have a vision of who you should be, what you should look like, how you should act. Almost every place I've worked has done that. Cut your hair, put that outfit on, your name is funky, you know, all that stuff. So when someone told you, and I'm sure they did, hey, Cynt, this is what you need to do to fit in here. Tell me what happened there.
Okay, so when I first started with the company at 21 years old, and they told me to get rid of my braids and my red shoes because they were unprofessional for the workplace, I went home and stayed up all night with my mom and my oldest sister, and we took out my braids. I got rid of the red shoes. We started borrowing clothes. So I complied because I just didn't know any better. 19 years later, when I'm 40, and I get the big call on the officer promotion, and the person on the other end, my boss, starts telling me to change my name, what to wear, all the stuff you just mentioned.
Wait. But hang on a second. So you'd worked there for 19 years and you were going in for a promotion?
Yeah, the big promotion, the officer promotion.
Okay.
The big one. And at that time, there were 200,000 plus people in the company, 110 officers, only 2 other Black women. So this was like big. And when I got the call, yeah, she said, you know, the board just elected you to be an officer of the corporation. This is exciting. She says, but here's what I want you to do. I left you a magazine because I just got home. I literally had just walked in my house. She said, I left a magazine for you on your desk. And so it's a picture of these Black people in the magazine. I think you'd look good with short hair. So I kind of circled that. They have all white on. I think you should start wearing white, get rid of some of the, I like my reds and fuchsias. I mean, I do blue a lot now, just the Mavs, but. And so she said, get rid of some of that. And then, she just had it all mapped out. She says, and I don't want you to say words like blessed. So you should just like say lucky. And I'm thinking, I'm blessed. Okay. And so then she said, and you laugh just too loud. So stop being so loud. Well, you don't have a reason to laugh and be happy. I've been through a lot of my life. And so she says, and then we're not going to have all the people coming to visit on the floor all the time because that open door policy has to go away. You're too in touch with the people. And so she just went through this laundry list of things she wanted me to change. And it just got to the point where I just thought, I'm not going to do this. I have to be. You said no? I'm supposed to be. And so I said no. Now, my husband is in the background listening to one side of the conversation, and she's telling me to cut my hair and how she wants me to wear it. I said, you know what? I don't think my hair will even do that. I'm a black woman with nappy hair. She goes, no, I know people, you can get it done. And he's in the background going, my barber will handle it. I got a barber, we're good. This is a big promotion. And then I said, and he would hear me say, I am blessed. And so I don't want to stop saying that word. He said, it's okay, just say it at home. So he's in the background basically saying, play the game. And Hoda, I just told her, I said, I'm not going to accept it. I am so honored. I'm excited. As I'm a vice president of the company, I am just doing way better than I ever thought I was going to do. I came here in a fast track program to be a director. So I'm 2 levels above that. I have a fabulous team. I have a fabulous job. Life is good. God is good to me. And so help me figure out how to say no. And so then we hung up and I told my husband, I said, I turned it down and I went to change clothes. And he was just sitting there. And then my phone rang again. And it was my boss's boss. And he said, I'm going to put somebody on the line. And it was the head of the company. And he said, Cynt. And she had told me I couldn't be Cynt. And I had to be Cynthia or Cindy because nobody understood Cynt. And he said, Cynt, and put emphasis on it. He said, I heard about what just happened. Let's do this all over again. He said, the person whose office I sat in a few months ago is the person we just named an officer. And we're going to make that announcement. I don't want you to change a thing. And he just went on to talk about my work ethic, what we had accomplished, the work with the people. I mean, he was wonderful. He said, don't you ever, ever change, and don't allow anyone to make you change. Now, I mean, when I think about it today, it makes me almost cry because that's the value of a good, effective leader. He changed the whole dynamic. He made it okay for me to be my authentic self. And so I took the job and kept climbing and got promotions and moved to other states and now I'm in Texas.
Well, you know what I love too? You had a real epiphany. There was a moment where you were standing, I think at NASDAQ or on Wall Street, where they were ringing the bell. And it was your whole crew up there, and there you stood. And there was something that came to you in that moment that so touched and moved me. What were you thinking while you were up there in that moment of glory?
Well, it was so wonderful because our CFO at the time, John Stevens, had invited me to go because we were going to ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. And so prior to that, we were having lunch and we're walking up the street and we're standing there talking. I just so happened to look up and I saw the sign that said Wall Street. And I just started crying. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, you know, my father told us, unfortunately, that we were going to be hookers on the street. And my response was that I'm going to make my money one day on Wall Street. And I can't believe I'm standing here on Wall Street. It was beautiful. Oh. It was just absolutely beautiful. And then he sent me a picture of us ringing the bell with a note on it telling me how proud he was as one of the top executives of our company, that he was with me when I realized I had made it to Wall Street. It was beautiful. How are you trying to make me cry?
I need them. Okay, I got to get to the Mavericks because I know this is so big and important. So you're done. You've kind of retired, I guess, from AT&T, and then they're having issues at the Dallas Mavericks. It's a toxic work environment. Things are not going well. Mark Cuban needs help. He needs someone to fix this place. They don't have I don't think any minorities in the top level. There aren't women or very few. And your phone rings and you agree to step into this organization. This is an organization, like any male-dominated organization, it's steeped in history. This is the way we do things. Here you come, Cynt. You're like, hey, I don't know basketball, but I know how to manage. Here I am. You had to literally change a toxic work environment. If you had to nutshell how that was even possible to take something and turn it around, especially something that was so established, how would you nutshell how you did that?
Here's how I nutshelled it, Hoda. I had a boss who was sincere about change and who had my back every step of the way and was serious about wanting to change the culture and wanting this to be a great place to work for his people. So it started with setting the tone at the very top. And then I laid out a vision that said we would set the global standard by the end of that year for diversity and inclusion. And I started with that because I believe in the business case for diversity. And if we get that right, if we get inclusion right, we can be successful. And then I laid out a set of values. The spells crafts. So our hashtag is perfect our crafts. Character, respect, authenticity, fairness, teamwork, and safety, both physical and emotional safety. Told our team these values would be on the walls, but more importantly, they would operate in the halls. We have values-based employment from this day forward. Every decision we make, every hire we make, everything is based on this. And then we had a 100-day plan. A 100-day plan that had 4 parts: model zero tolerance, meaning hotline, make sure we kind of purge the old culture. A Mavs women's agenda, so an express documented agenda around how we were going to elevate, empower, educate women. A cultural transformation agenda, and then operational effectiveness. So looking at pay equity, gender pay equity, market-based compensation, performance management, just the basic things to run a business. And it was about 200 initiatives. We were very transparent. We had just everywhere in the office. And as an organization, we would check off and we made progress. And then I had one-on-ones with every single employee in the organization to get to know them, because I truly believe that my job as a leader is to do 3 things. I call it my 3 L's. Listen to the people, learn from the people, and love the people. And so that's what I came to do. Yeah, that's what I came to do. So it was a committed boss, vision, values, a 100-day plan, and loving the people, and we did it.
What did you do with the haters? Because there were some haters that were like, who is she? She doesn't know basketball. Don't even listen to her. Don't take the meeting. What did you do with them?
They're gone. They're gone. The haters can't stay. What we were trying to do was institutionalize an inclusive culture. And so there were some who balked against it. There were some who were part of the old culture who didn't want to change. The NBA was doing an investigation. I was doing my own investigation. I wasn't going to just wait for another investigation. I had to do what I needed to do walking in as a leader and show these people we were serious about being a great place to work. And some just didn't buy into that. And so we let them go. And so I had some very hard decisions to make. They were not difficult decisions because I think it was Walt Disney's brother, who said it's easy to make decisions when you know what your values are. I know my personal values and the values of the Mavs. So we did what we needed to do. And so our team ended up, within 90 days, we had 50% women on our executive leadership team and 47% people of color. And now it's 50-50. So we did what we needed to do and handled our business. It's a great place to work. I love it. I fell in love with them. I fell in love with these people at the Mavs. And the haters are gone.
Well, you can tell. And I mean, you've led your organization through a pandemic, through a whole entire moment of social justice that still continues to this day. And I can see that you work through your same values. Cynt, I love you. By the way, real quick, is there going to be a head coach of the NBA who is a woman? I'm just speaking. I hear Becky Hammond calling. It's coming?
It's coming. Adam Silver's committed. We're all committed. It is coming. It is coming. It is coming. Right now, our new head coach is Jason Kidd, who went to my alma mater. So he's a California Golden Bear, and he's awesome. And so our new general manager, Nicole Harrison, is awesome too. But it's coming. And we do have Christy Tolliver. So she's a woman. So a head coach is coming. You know it's coming.
I know it is. By the way, Cynt, I want to go run a marathon or something right now. I feel pumped. I feel ready to face the world. I know how you do. What an honor and a privilege it is to sit with you, Cynt. Thank you so much.
I love you, sister. I'll see you soon. I'll
love
see you
in November. Too. Okay.
Bye.
And now, please welcome Atlantic contributing writer Leah Wright Rigger.
My first 2 children entered the world to the sound of my laughter, great big peals of uncontrollable laughter. When my 3rd child was born on a cruelly hot night last summer in a sterile delivery room, his experience was no different. My reaction to birthing a child may have seemed bizarre to a besieged and battle-weary hospital staff in the midst of a pandemic, but I believe that my joy was a normal response to my scenario. Celebratory joy felt particularly appropriate for the occasion, given the reality of Black mothers' experiences in America: a global health pandemic, a nationwide racial reckoning, and horrifying rates of Black maternal mortality. My choice to laugh in the face of all of this was a reflection of what the historian Kelly Carter Jackson calls violent joy. A kind of joy that is rooted in an insistence on Black humanity and an assertion of Black personhood. For many people, though, a Black mother choosing joy is in stark contrast to the most prominent stories about Black motherhood. Throughout generations, society has rendered Black mothers dangerous. Just think of the American mythology surrounding the so-called menace of the pathological Black matriarch of the 1960s, the treacherous welfare queen of the 1970s, and the drug-addicted crack mother and her babies of the 1980s. Black mothers' private lives are consistently subjected to public surveillance, scrutiny, and judgment, as if to suggest that these women cannot be trusted to be responsible for themselves, or that they are unfit for motherhood. Recently, social justice movements have helped expand and shift ideas about Black mothers and motherhood for the better, like through increased attention to the Black maternal health crisis, and through the advocacy of Black mothers who have lost their children to police violence. Yet, much of the American public still understands Black motherhood as an idea rooted in crisis, as the feminist theorist Jennifer Nash explains in her new book, Birthing Black Mothers. Over the past few months, I've interviewed a number of Black mothers about those needs, wants, and experiences that make up their lives. Our conversations were centered on one question: what does free Black motherhood look like to you? Our discussions were revealing, with everyone offering different ideas of motherhood unbound by societal assumptions, expectations, and restrictions. Even so, a consistent refrain began to emerge. Black mothers see choice, control, and self-definition as integral parts of their visions of freedom. Perhaps the best summary of all of the responses was an observation from the Reverend Teresa Thames, who said, "Freedom for Black mothers looks like walking through the world, living and thriving without bracing yourself for the trauma that results from white supremacy and rampant inequality." Last year's racial reckoning and the pandemic have magnified this sensibility, pushing a lot of Black mothers to acknowledge that their experience of motherhood is compounded by a unique kind of suffering. Still, the women I spoke with rejected a framing that rooted their experiences of motherhood in pain. Their ideas of free Black motherhood were connected to a unified understanding of agency. As a Black mother of 3 children who has lived her entire life under the heaviness of racist limitations and violence, I am exhausted. But Black women have always found value in creating new visions for ourselves, even when that new vision simply means welcoming your child into the world with great big peals of uncontrollable laughter.
For a session produced by our underwriter EY, please welcome Kelly Grier, U.S. Chair and Managing Partner and America's Managing Partner, and Nick Thompson, CEO of The Atlantic.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the CEO of The Atlantic, and it is my great pleasure to be here with Kelly Grier, who is the U.S. CEO of Ernst & Young, meaning she has 82,000 colleagues who she works with. Kelly, it's lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be here.
So let's begin with the pandemic. The last 18 months have been crazy for everybody. They've changed the way every company works. They've changed the way we've lived. They've changed every structure of every business. Explain something interesting about the way EY has changed, and also something about the way one of your clients has changed.
Well, I think it's fair to say that we've changed in just about every respect. And I think we're seeing the same with our clients and certainly helping them adapt to this forever changed world. EY is operating in a fundamentally different way today than we were pre-pandemic in terms of having gone from being on-premise and serving our clients literally on-premise at their offices or at our office. We are now working very productively, by the way, in a fully remote paradigm. And we're still doing, extraordinary work and having the ability to meet our professional responsibilities. We've also recognized that flexibility and the overall well-being that our people have really come to appreciate and prioritize more than ever before has to become one of our imperatives as well. And that's become a real central part of the value proposition that we extend to our people. And we're seeing our clients do the same. I think we've always recognized the imperative around health and well-being, but more as a benefit as opposed to a central business imperative. And for us, it's become central to our ability to execute our business imperatives and strategies to really put our people and their well-being at the center of what we do. So that's another, I'd say, very fundamental change and reckoning that's come as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing our clients adapt in all the same ways, moving at a totally different pace, having to adapt the way that they care for their people, the way that they get their work done, how and where that work gets done, and frankly, just adapting to a world that is constrained in just about every respect, thinking about supply chain constraints, as well as the workforce constraints is requiring companies to use technology differently in order to continue to be able to deliver on their clients and their customers' needs and expectations, and technology is becoming even more central to that transformation as well.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second. So we're now 18 months in. Tell me something that you've done in the last few months that would have surprised the Kelly Grier of 18 months ago. As the pandemic has gone on, what's something new that's changed?
I think one of the things that we've experienced, and I think that this is prevalent with our clients as well, is just how the pace of change is unrelenting. And it's not iterative change, it's radical change. And you can't simply, wake up and think that you're going to operate today the way that you did yesterday, because you're in a constant state of having to accommodate massive change. We thought that we were on the other side of managing the pandemic, and then the Delta variant threw all of that into a totally different, paradigm again, with businesses closing, or at least reverting back to more reduced loads, caseloads and operating loads. And you've got to be able to adapt to that. You've got to be able to every day get up and say it's going to be a different day. That's been the thing that I think has been surprising, is that the pace of change and the propensity of change is just at an unprecedented level, and it doesn't appear to be abating anytime soon.
I feel like we had 3 good days where everybody was vaccinated. We all came into the office, we were happy, the windows were open, and then, oh my God, breakout cases, we're masked up and everybody goes home.
It's so true. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about robotics. You mentioned it. UI is known for being forward-thinking on robotics. Tell me something about the pace of change of how you've introduced either robots or robotic systems into the workforce at EY or with one of your partners.
Yeah, well, we've been using robotic process automation for many years now, and one of the things that we've done more recently was using automation for the HR processes within the firm, specifically around performance management, where we created a chat bot called Goldie, and we launched it literally in 28 days, which is fairly record-paced launch across 250,000 people, and within the first, literally within the first 28 days of it being live, this chatbot had answered over 500,000 questions that would otherwise have gone to our HR team. And it allowed our HR team, our human resources team, who's unbelievably busy right now, as you can imagine, to divert their attention to the more substantive work that requires both judgment and human interaction. So it's been an incredible opportunity for us to create some capacity in a situation where we, like many other organizations, are somewhat resource constrained. The talent market right now is absolutely fierce, and so we're finding ways to create more capacity within our existing workforce by using robots and automation and again, all kinds of different technology tools.
Do you license Goldie? Because I spent a lot of time this morning responding on Slack to HR questions.
We don't license it per se, but we do implement very similar, we have implemented, in fact, very similar structures and tools with many of our clients.
So one of the questions that this would naturally raise is a lot of people are concerned about the future of work, and if I worked in an HR office, I might be excited about Goldie. I might be a little scared about Goldie. Explain to me briefly your philosophy on how AI will change the nature of the work that we do in the future, the jobs it will enhance, the jobs it'll take away, and how you will deal with that.
Yeah, I think that what we're finding is that technology and robotics is a great example of that, because it's really taking some of the more mundane, repetitive tasks out of the human being and really having the robot take over that transaction processing activity, which then liberates the person, the human being that needs to be interacting on a personal level, on an intellectual level, asserting judgments, and it creates more capacity for that to be the central mission of the work, as opposed to a secondary element of work in addition to the more administrative stuff. So what we're finding is actually it just creates significantly more capacity for the human part of our workforce to do the work that's more meaningful. And what we're also finding is that there's a corollary need for technology capabilities and competency, and it's actually creating more jobs than it's displacing. For us, we're actually seeing this as an opportunity to really augment our existing workforce and to meet the rising demands that we have relative to serving our clients and meeting the marketplace. So what we haven't seen is displacement of any of our workers at all. What we've seen instead is an ability to create more capacity for them to do more meaningful work.
Well, that is a marvelous, positive note to end on. We're at time. Thank you so much for talking with me. And next year, I will be back, but Goldie will help me prep my questions. Thank you so much, Kelly Grier.
Look forward to it.
Please welcome Atlantic staff writer Giorgis.
The birth of the opioid crisis started in the United States in the late 1990s and only worsened over the years. The forthcoming Hulu series, Dopesick, takes a look back at how opioids made their way into hospitals and doctors' offices and became a widely prescribed painkiller. Take a look at this clip.
The FDA, Justice, the doctors, they all want their drugs. And Big Pharma will spend everything they can to make sure that they get them. And this is just going to keep going and going until we're all just one big pill-popping zombie nation.
Have you seen Purdue's I Got My Life Back video?
Sure.
It's a fraud. They were told it was a PSA when they shot it. And several of those participants became addicted.
Few of them are dead. Or close to it.
You know who'll be interested in that? Sarah Miller and Judy Cohen.
Sarah Miller, Judy Cohen.
At the DOJ's Office of Consumer Litigation.
Well, I thought they were all conspirators in the upcoming zombie apocalypse.
Not everybody. That was my tip for the day, boys, so if you can both kindly f off, I'd certainly be better off for it.
Thank you, Bridget.
Sorry about your divorce.
I'm joined by one of the stars of Dopesick, actor and activist Rosario Dawson. Rosario, welcome.
Thank you. It's so tragic to watch Bridget again in that moment, the cynicism, that you can't help, I think, but start to get when you're working on cases like this and with situations like this. And she, as the character, she's sort of an amalgamation of a few people, but was just really at the heart and center at the very beginning of this crisis. And when you see this tidal wave coming and you know that you can't stop it, but you try anyway because it's the right thing to do. It's just, It's really devastating.
Absolutely. How much did you know about the backstory of the crisis before you took on this role?
Well, unfortunately, this is a crisis that has touched a lot of people. So I have family members who became opioid addicts because of starting with actual prescription of OxyContin. And some of them aren't alive anymore. Some of them didn't raise their families and, ended up getting divorced and being estranged from their family. The whole livelihood's destroyed. I recently had a friend come to visit me who'd had an injury, and she was given 1 bottle of Oxycontin, and she came to stay with me, and she ended up staying for about a month. So she ran out, it was only supposed to be the 1 bottle anyway. But by the time she got back home, she started feeling really bad effects. So she had to go withdrawal. She had to get another medication from her doctor to help her with the withdrawal symptoms. And that was off of 1 bottle that she took exactly as prescribed, and that's the thing, is that so many people are very sensitive to this, and it can start to almost immediately start to change your body's chemistry.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the character that you play in this, who's a DEA agent? And you're right, we see her sort of in that scene with the cynicism and with the intensity, all of this washing over her. But could you give us a little bit about her backstory?
Yeah. So I play DEA Bridget Meyer. Again, she's sort of an amalgamation of a couple of characters. But that means that there are scenes in this that are word for word. And, she was on the case. The pill came out in 96, and she was on them in 99. And had the room she'd been in and the argument she was making been more effective, had she been able to find more collaborators, it really would have turned the tide. She still was very crucial in making inroads, helping to change certain things and access points and stuff. But you can see in this scene, just how much the toll that it took on her. And I think that's what's really brilliant about what Danny Strong did. He took a risk in having the story. He's the showrunner for this. Yeah. He took a risk in having the story to kind of jump around through the years to get the story correctly expressed and to give you the breadth of people that this pill affected. So not just the doctors, not just the coal miners, not just the executives, not just the folks who were going out there and peddling all of this, but also the people working on the cases and the families that don't even take the pill, but how they're affected by it. It's just a really, I think, a very brilliant way of sort of showing the multi-layer effects of this and how people's lives were devastated who didn't even take the pill.
Right. That so much of this ripples out beyond the individual person, beyond the individual case, right? That it's so much bigger. I guess, how are you hoping that the series sort of brings greater understanding to the public or to those sort of not directly affected by the crisis?
I think a few things. One, I hope, unlike what we saw with the crack and cocaine epidemics and the 3 strikes rule and, the devastation that happened with the war on drugs in communities across, low income neighborhoods, which tended to be Black and brown, where there was just very little sympathy and empathy and actually quite aggressive approaches to what these communities were struggling with, being bombarded with drugs. I hope that people start to see and recognize more about what addiction really is and the effects on the body and the brain, and the realities with which getting through it requires different approaches than people have really wanted to do. My mom was one of those folks who very early 80s, 90s was doing harm reduction tactics, like handing out needles to people who were addicts so that HIV wouldn't spread. And that was considered very taboo and very negative. But it's like, we are dealing with compound issues here, and we have to get very creative about how we, approach them. And so I methadone clinics and all kinds of stuff that people kind of push back against. You've seen whole states push back against the ACA, just be, healthcare, people just really not having access to the resources that they need. And I hope that this builds that empathy that makes people realize that they can fight for this stuff and that it will make a trickle down effect to all of the people in their community, not just maybe their grandmother or their sister But for the person on the street, maybe, or the addict that you see on the corner, being able to get access to the kind of help that they need. So I also feel like we need to put pressure on our, the politicians, and we have to have stricter laws. There's lots of legislation and a lot of cases, and where we are now, because this case is still ongoing with the Sackler family in Purdue. There's actually a bill in Congress called the Sackler Act that they're trying to pass to make sure that we're able to hold these companies and these families who are behind them accountable, and that they can clean up the mess that they started. So I think the breadth and the scope with which this story unfolds and lets you know all the characters who are part of it, all the decision makers that made this possible, that need to be brought to justice. I think it'll hopefully really empower people to better know what to do, and to put the kind of pressure on our legislators that they need to have in order to pass acts like this.
Right. What would happen if we treated addiction as a public health issue and not as a criminal justice one when it comes to individual people being affected by it, right? How different of a country might we live in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of a common thread of interest in ways of bringing about big and systemic change throughout some of the works that you've taken on, whether that's on screen or kind of outside of it. And, I wanted to switch gears for a second and just ask you a little bit about Voto Latino and co-founding that, more than 15 years ago now? What sort of drove you to do that then? And, what kind of impact has it had in that stretch of time?
I guess much like what I've hoped to happen with Dope Sick, and to inspire people and educate people and amplify certain messages, is just basically all the things that I care about in general. So I was, I grew up in a squat in the Lower East Side. I saw firsthand, how much you can't compartmentalize these issues around housing and access to education and healthcare, that all of these things are intertwined and interconnected, and that a lot of people fall into traps because it's all compounded. And so for me, I've always been a big proponent of amplifying the messages of the organizers that I work with. Thank God for community organizers. And wanting to not just champion that with the different causes or joining boards or sharing messages, but recognizing that all of us have a tool, whether we have funds to donate or time to volunteer, we can vote. That is across genders, cultures, race, physical abilities. Like, we all have this opportunity to show up and vote. And by doing so, that's the umbrella to all of the issues that affect us all. And if we galvanize people to understand that power, we can make the real kind of critical changes that maybe we can't dedicate all our time, money, and energy and resources to in activism or public service or whatever. And so when I saw that Latinos became the largest minority in the country, it just seemed like, whoa, this is a sleeping giant. And we need to make sure that they are ready to take the reins as that population continues to grow in number and influence.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to think about that in light of all the voter suppression bills being put forth right now. And I guess how is the organization addressing some of that, because they're being put forth in multiple states, right? And what can other people do to support some of that work?
Well, we do definitely multi-pronged approach. We have lawsuits that we're a part of, kind of calling out the unconstitutionality of these things. Collaborations, we work with a lot of different organizers, trying to get information and information out to folks, galvanizing people, obviously, to vote. We've always been very collaborative and very resourceful when it comes to using our small means. We're a small organization to make a big impact. So everything from, we were the first ones to do voter texting technology to you could do voter registration. Now we have an app so you can do voter registration on per state. We have different collaborators. We helped to start the National Voter Registration Day. It was us and I think 4 or 5 other organizations. So we're just very we're very keyed into finding the right kind of committees and collaborators to get the agenda moved across, because we don't get all the funds. You know, the biggest issue that we see is that people will throw a lot of money behind a particular candidate, and you'll see so much money be spent on, you know, attack ads. I mean, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And you give us $1 million, $2 million. We have a very strong track record with our community and reaching out to people and empowering them of when and how to vote. And if you don't get those votes, then that candidate and all that money that was spent on the media just disappears. And what we're really always trying to push is for folks to understand, especially with disinformation and misinformation out there, which we have a whole strategy against, and we've been working to really push back against, because it's devastating people, and folks are being very much convinced to vote against themselves and their best interests, or not vote at all. And that is really scary. So we just try to do as multi-pronged approach as possible, and try to really push people to give us and other voting organizations the resources that we need. I think people like Stacey Abrams has shown what it makes, a difference it makes to have people on the ground and working within these communities for years on end and growing a base, so that when you need them, they can show up and they feel like you're really there with them, not just calling on them every 2 to 4 years.
Right. Not just reaching out when you need them, when they can do something for you. Absolutely. You know, if I can shift gears for a quick moment before I have to let you go here, I would really, really love to hear about Studio 189, the fashion line that you co-founded as well. What was the inspiration behind that, and what sort of excites you about fashion as another space, as another site of expression?
So, you know, my great grandmother was the seamstress for the Ladies International Garment Workers Union. And that was the first sort of organizing that passed down in my family, of like union organizing. And, you know, my grandmother was taken along on that, and she would translate the materials, and my mom used to be there. And then in tow, she brought me to all her marches. And, you know, Abrima has a really similar background with her family as well. And recognizing that young, you know, intense women in New York who has family members that they can point to that really made a lot of sacrifices to get us to the point where we are, and going around the world and meeting, you know, the people that we are, that are, you know, that we're connected with, and no different than us, except they were born in a different zip code. Well, how can we better recognize everyone, like the people like my great grandmother and beyond, who should be able to be dignified with work and with good living wage work. So I remember I took, you know, Abrima comes from, you know, she worked at Hermes and Bottega Veneta. She speaks French, Italian. She's just like brilliant. We met as teenagers. I've been a huge fan of hers forever. And I invited her. She was one of the only people I could think to invite. And I was amazed that she said yes. I'm so grateful, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because I'm on the board of V-Day. V currently used to be Eve Ensler, had invited us. We were opening up the City of Joy. And Abrima was reading Muhammad Yunus's work, everything on microloans and social business. And then here we are in this space that was created for women to know their rights, to be empowered, to be supported, who had been the victim of abuse, sexual trauma, because of conflict mineral mining. And we were saying, okay, how can we take the resources and the opportunities and, you know, the things that we've been able to build up in New York and in our families and in our communities in the States, and collaborate with these women here? Because why is something made in Italy considered a value, but something handcrafted and unique and special and beautiful and artisanal is considered charity? Like, we need to change that model. Luxury can come out of Africa, and that doesn't mean that you just take the resources, the ideas, the people, the cotton, the chocolate, and then put the value someplace else. But that's something made in Africa you think of as made with quality and is associated with that, and a narrative change. So it was a lot of different things that kind of came together as to why we wanted to do this. We settled in Ghana because Abrima's family is Ivorian and Ghanaian. And it's been a few years. We did our first presentations at the Lower East Side Girls Club. Now we just did our huge presentation, which was our first one back after the quarantine last year. We did a show where we had all our seamstresses and tailors as the VIP front line at our factory, watching the collection come down. And this year we were honoring the anniversary of 9/11, the 20-year anniversary, with a song Uproot Andy put together that he had actually recorded 20 years ago on the sounds that he encountered over 5 days after 9/11. So we opened with that, and then we had a Farsi singer and our friend Bridget, who was singing with her to explain what she was saying. And then we had Sarah Jones, who wrote an incredible piece. She's a brilliant spoken word artist, and she does multiple different characters and one-woman shows. I will say, I literally made her my friend. I was like, saw her, kept seeing her shows and was like, this woman has to be my friend. And then all these years later, she was wearing Studio 189 and performing. And we did a moment of silence, and we had dancers. And this is what we always do. We bring a lot of celebration and joy and our heritage and, to Fashion Week. We really see fashion as an agent of social change. We're an ethical, sustainable brand. We do upcycling. We're natural dyes. We work with indigo, old techniques. We're slow fashion, because fast fashion is killing us. And yeah, it's another thing that I'm super passionate about, showing the world that they can vote with their time, their energy, their actual vote in the elections, and they can vote with their dollar. And that's just, I guess voting is my number one thing. And I even managed to figure that out in fashion.
Well, congratulations on the line, and congratulations on the clarity of the vote, tying everything together.
Can you tell I'm concerned about the midterms? I'm just going to keep plugging voting.
just to keep coming through in every little way. But Rosario, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, Dopesick is going to premiere on Hulu on October 13th. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And now, here's the executive editor of The Atlantic, Adrienne LaFrance.
I'm Adrienne LaFrance, The Atlantic's executive editor. Thank you so much for being with us. Very glad you're here, and I'm very glad to be joined today by Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO and co-author of The Age of AI. Welcome, Eric, and thank you so much for being with us.
So great to be with you.
I want to start with the book you have coming out, The Age of AI. And I want to start by asking, for decades, we've sort of been waiting for artificial intelligence to catch up with the imagination that we've had for it. And that took a while. And it seems now that that moment really is upon us, where this technology is advancing incredibly rapidly. And I wanted to start just by asking you how different you think life will be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as a result of where we are in AI advancement.
Well, we think it's going to be quite different. And the reason we think it's quite different is we think that this is the beginning of a new epoch of human civilization. Frankly, when the Renaissance happened, we developed collectively 500 years ago the notion of reason, the notion that things did not just descend from God, that independent actors could criticize each other. Under that same argument, the arrival of a different intelligence that's not human-like, but similar to humans, is such a watershed moment. We're working hard to make that happen. It will have a lot of implications, many of them incredibly good, but many of them very concerning. We wrote the book to try to cover both scenarios.
So you're invoking the scientific revolution, the age of enlightenment. I've been wondering, just as thinking about sort of recent tech revolutions we've lived through, I think about the sort of triple revolution of the internet, smartphones, and the social web. But I'm curious for your views on, in terms of what we can be prepared to experience, is this bigger than all three of those? I mean, how does it compare to an already really sort of accelerated speed of technological development in the past, even just 20 years?
I do think it will be bigger, and the authors collectively disagree on how positive or negative, but we articulate these points in the book. If you look back 20 years ago, people were talking about social networks. No one had any idea that social networks would become so important and would shape the political discourse, elections, how people are treated. It would give a voice to people who are underrepresented, but also people who we don't necessarily want to hear from. And we didn't at the time understand the implications of putting everyone on the same network. We need to think now of what happens when artificial intelligence is co-resident with us in the world. It lives with us, it watches us, it helps us. Maybe it interferes with us occasionally. We don't really know. I'll give you a good example. If you imagine a child born today, you give the child a baby toy, a bear, and that bear is AI enabled, and every year the child gets a better toy. Well, every year the bear gets smarter, and in a decade, the child and the bear, who are best friends, are watching television, and the bear says, I don't really like this television show. And the kid says, yeah, I agree with you. Okay, what do we think about that? What do we think when humans and these AI systems become best friends? Do we lose our communications and our warmth among humans, or does it get stronger? We don't know. What happens when the elderly, who are often very lonely, find themselves dealing with inanimate objects who they treasure far more than their human caregivers? We just don't know.
Well, I mean, you're posing it as a question. What do we think of it? I can tell you, I find it mildly creepy, the bear best friend example, but I'm curious what you think is when you, and of course it's incredibly complex, but would you want your children, your grandchildren to be raised with an AI best friend? Does that concern you, or is it exciting to you? Like, where on the spectrum do you fall?
Well, I think a lot depends on how it actually works. If that AI best friend is also the best teacher in the world, the best mentor in the world, the warmest possible version of what a child needs, then I'm all for it. But let's imagine that this bear has a hidden bug in it that was inserted from some evil person, where the bear is slightly racist, right? Which is a value that I do not want my child to be exposed to. That's not okay. Or let's reverse the scenario and imagine that I am in fact a racist, which I'm not, and I want my bear to be racist, and I want a programmed racist bear. We haven't figured out what the rules are, right? And because these are systems that will be interacting with humans every day, they will have an outsized impact on their experience of daily life. The information space, the social world that we all live in now, is so governed by the online media and, frankly, many of the attributes of click and clickbait and all those other kinds of things. It's really disturbing. Now, as you know, Dr. Kissinger wrote in 2018 an article which was entitled How the Enlightenment Ends. And we followed up with an article in The Atlantic called The Metamorphosis. So we've been working on this for a while, also in The Atlantic. We've been working on these ideas for a while to frame them in a context, not about the technology, which hopefully we will describe accurately, but rather on how society will react to this, and it's coming fast. Dr. Kissinger says his concern is us technologists are building this stuff without a historical record and without an understanding of the deep issues in humanity that we are touching in our technology.
You chaired the 2021 National Security Commission on AI, and one of the recommendations that came out of it was to reject or recommend to President Biden to reject a ban on autonomous weapon systems, so AI weapon systems. And that recommendation runs against an argument that many of your peers have made in terms of, fear of a world in which AI weapons would make battle decisions that we can't understand or explain. Talk a little bit about your position and why you come down where you do.
So, as a general comment about AI, when I speak about AI, most of my friends think I'm talking about a robot that has gone amok and a woman scientist slays the robot, right? And that's what we think we're talking about. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about are information systems and knowledge systems that are with us every day. And today, it's fair to say that those systems are imprecise, they're dynamic in that they change all the time, they're emergent in that when you combine them, you can get unexpected behaviors, some good, some bad, and they're capable of learning. Well, it's the combination of those 4 points that makes these AI systems both problematic, but also very powerful. So if you then apply it to a life-critical decision, and I can think of no more life-critical decision than the launch of a very, very deadly weapon, how would we know that the computer was making the right decision? We can't prove it. It makes mistakes. It's a mistake that's intolerable. People who think that this is an easy problem, let me give you another example, and we talk about this in the book. You're on a ship, and there's a missile coming in that you can't see. And the AI system is telling you about this and says, you will be dead if you don't press this button within 20 seconds. Now, the rule in the military is the human needs to be in control. And this is no question, the human has to press the button. What are the odds of that human not pressing the button? Pretty low. So the notion of the compression of time in the context of these life-critical decisions, especially in military defense, is really important. If you go back to the original sort of RAND studies about automatic defense, and if you go back to the movie with Peter Sellers, where they threatened to launch a nuclear weapon, and the doomsday machine, if you will, automatically launches one in return, which is retaliatory, is a good proxy for what we're talking about. I'll give you another example. We're collectively as an industry working on general intelligence, and the general intelligence will emerge in the next 10 or 20 years, and depending on how you define it, those systems will be enormously powerful, and those systems will be enormously dangerous in the wrong hands. So they're going to have to be treated as, in a way, similar to nuclear weapons, but with a new doctrine, because we don't understand proliferation, we don't understand how to do containment with these new weapon systems.
Well, and I want to go back to that in a minute, the question of sort of like what happens to our theories of deterrence with these new kinds of weapons. But first, you began to sort of allude to the geopolitical context here, which I'm curious to hear you speak a bit more about. Just, you know, if sort of the U.S. position in all of this relative to what we imagine China might do or Russia might do. And you write about this in the new book a bit as well, but talk about the extent to which your position that we should reject a ban on autonomous weapons is about making sure that the United States stays strong relative to these other superpowers.
Yes, so the core argument that we're making is that there will be a small number of countries that will master this technology. And it's important that there be discussions about how to limit them. It's important that those discussions be bilateral. The number of countries that will be able to field at this level will be by the handful. So a reasonable expectation will be that these kinds of systems, when they eventually emerge, will be under the control of large national governments, such as the United States and China, and maybe a few others. We feel quite strongly that the discussions about where the limits and lines should start now. We don't want a situation where there has to be an explosion before there's a treaty. If you go back to 1945, with the use of nuclear weapons in World War II, which ended it, there was no treaty at the time banning or limiting their use. And we spent the next 15 years, and Dr. Kissinger was a key player in this, developing the concepts of containment, mutually assured destruction, balance of power, and so forth. We're going to need to rediscover those in this new age of dangerous weapons.
When you were Google CEO in 2006 is when Google acquired YouTube, and it was a very, very different internet then. And now YouTube is it's one of the places where we see the spread of extremism and misinformation among many other platforms, including Google as well, for that matter. And I wonder sort of what you wish you knew then, and how differently you see platforms and perhaps what their responsibilities are relative to 2006 or 2010 even.
Well, I can tell you in the 2000s, our view, and I think I speak for the company during that time in the industry, was the American view that the solution to more information is bad information is more information. And so we took a position that was quite aggressively against removing content, even if it was harmful. And we viewed that as both the right thing technologically, but also the right thing culturally. And we were criticized heavily in other countries for this. To me, the most interesting thing about COVID as online has been that platforms like Twitter and Facebook, which have resisted any form of takedown, have worked aggressively, or they claim to be working aggressively, to take down COVID misinformation. So COVID is an example of something where falsehoods are on the other side of the line. I can tell you today, I'm not involved with it. I've left Google. YouTube has a team which makes these decisions every day and tries to figure out what the line is. So you get to decide where you think that line is. Many people I know believe that the kind of lying and misinformation that goes on social media is on the other side of the line. It should be prohibited. But I don't know how to prohibit it in a systematic way. And I furthermore believe that the people who are spreading misinformation will get access to these tools that will make it even easier for them to spread information. The industry has got to figure out a way to stop the spread of misinformation. One of them, by the way, just to digress technically, is that the information is not watermarked in such a way that we know its origin. It would be relatively easy, the industry as a whole, to start by saying, where did this information actually come from? Where did this picture or this text or video or whatever, where did it enter all of our systems? And then who modified it? That alone would help us at least understand the source of the manipulation.
Do you think it's possible that these platforms are just too big and humans shouldn't be connected at this scale? Like, I think of, Facebook has 2.9 billion users. Is it possible that this is just not how humanity is meant to be organized?
Well, it's pretty clear that there are things that humans are not very good at. And one is a cascade of information. So we're not very good with rapid change, lots of information overload. It just causes our brains to go crazy, with maybe a few notable exceptions. For normal people, it's like, oh my God, I just can't take it anymore. And it leads to rises in cortisol, stress, perhaps mental illness, God knows. So we have a problem that the information that is coming at you is so profound. In our book, what we talk about is that this coexistence with this information resource that's driven by features that are not human, right, that are maybe human-like, is a change in the information space that is profound, right? And we worry a lot in the book about how do you regulate it? We're not in favor of censorship. We're not trying to filter people's opinions. What are the appropriate restrictions of the misuse of this new technology? Now, you haven't asked me all the great benefits of all of this. Let me give you an example of why we should fight for AI. The people I talk to in science, which is where I spend most of my time now, would love to have an AI that would just read everything, because the explosion in knowledge in science is overwhelming their brilliant brains. So you can imagine that the AI system, which sees everything and can summarize, can be used to move biology forward, drug discovery forward, and so forth at an enormous rate. We, in the introduction to our book, we use 3 index points. The first is AlphaGo, which beat the Korean and Chinese competitor people in the world, and invented moves that had never been seen in 2,500 years. I know because I was physically present when this happened. We talk about a drug called Halicin, where the computer took 100 million compounds, figured out how they worked, and figured out how to assemble a new broad class antibiotic which had never been conceived of, which is in trials now. And we also talk about a technology called GPT-3, which is a representative of what are called universal models, where they read everything and then you try to figure out what they understand and what they can do, and the results are miraculous. We're just at the beginning of this ramp that I'm describing. And now is the time for our book, in my view, why we wrote it, to say, let's figure out how we want to handle these things. So for example, is it okay, I use my facetious example of the bear, is it okay to have a racist bear? Maybe people will think that's okay. I don't think it's okay, but that's an appropriate debate to have. Let's have it now.
Final question for you, and it's somewhat existential. You've written before that the intelligence in artificial intelligence is sort of needlessly anthropomorphic, and that we need to reframe the way we think about what knowledge is, which is what you've just sort of talked about as well. I wonder quickly what your view is of what human intelligence then becomes. If machines can do all of the things we can do and better, is there any form of intelligence that remains uniquely human? And should there be? Should we worry if there isn't? What realm remains ours?
I could speculate that in a few hundred years, there will probably be no places where computer intelligence is not as good as humans. But certainly for the rest of all of our lifetimes, there will be things that are uniquely human that involve the synthesis of ideas out of left field, things which are just true ideas, true new discovery, true innovation. If you look at the pattern of AI, it's not replacing the brilliant lawyers, columnists, writers, teachers, researchers. It's replacing menial jobs. So what happened with AI was it started working on vision. And an awful lot of people just look and monitor things, which is pretty mind-numbing. And that technology now, computers are better at vision than humans, which allows humans to be freed up to do higher order things. So for the foreseeable period, and certainly for our lifetimes, there will be a place for humans. Hopefully that place for humans is using what we do best, which is our creativity, our sense of art, our sense of morals, our sense of spirit. Those are going to be very difficult for the current tasks and current focus of how AI evolves, at least in this generation of invention.
Eric, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to everyone who has joined us.
And thank you to The Atlantic for helping us with our 2 previous articles and helping promote our book. Congratulations on a fantastic conference today.
And that brings us to the close of day 4 of the Atlantic Festival. If you enjoyed what you saw and want more of the Atlantic, you can become a subscriber. Please visit theatlantic.com for more information on how to do that. If you're already a subscriber, thank you. We have so much more in store for you over the next 3 days, and we hope you'll stay with us. Tomorrow, our Idea Stage kicks off again at 2 p.m. Eastern, and you can check out our full schedule within the event platform. See you soon.